Hello, Isuna here, back again with yet another art video. If you've been following me on TikTok, you know that I've recently finished my most latest sketchbook, so I decided to do a sketchbook tour. I've filmed many sketchbook tours in the past, but I never did one for YouTube, so I wanted to take my time with this one and include all the sketchbooks of 2023 and now all the way to June 2024. For this past year, I mainly focused on getting better with watercolors and gouache, so logically it would make sense to do a sketchbook tour of my watercolor sketchbooks. This sketchbook here is the Reflections Watercolor Journal, but more on that later. I want to focus on the drawings themselves. I was still new to this type of paper, so my first few pages were me swatching my different art supplies, as well as drawing my original characters that I want to make into a series someday. This first sketchbook lasted me from December 2022 to May 2023. I was slowly trying to get back into posting art consistently online. I had took a bit of a hiatus from doing so. I remember early on here that I was looking at a lot of different Pinterest photos and watching a lot of nature documentaries, so that explains why I did a lot of landscapes early on. One of the things that I really enjoyed about this paper is how it handles gouache. Looking at this now makes me really want to get back into painting more landscapes because I find it very fun, almost like solving a puzzle. What I will say, I wasn't in the best of mental states back then, so a lot of the art that I started, I didn't necessarily finish. I also had a bad habit between jumping in between different sketchbooks, depending on what I was working on and the moods I was in. I was definitely of the mindset that I was afraid of using my more expensive art supplies, even if I bought them with my own money. Note to self and any other artists listening, this makes no sense. You bought the art supplies, so don't be afraid to use them. That's what they're there for. While I liked painting landscapes, I knew I wanted to do more character design focused work, so I decided to focus more on portraits here. Bouncing between watercolor and gouache, I wanted to improve how I mixed my colors and how to come up with different skin tones. Here's another drawing of Lao Mai and her bird Garuda. I changed Garuda's design quite a lot since 2023, and I'm still trying to work out the final details here. Here's another gouache portrait. I didn't exactly like how this turned out, although I was trying to experiment more with different colors. I think that's probably why I didn't like it as much. More portraits here. I think I got the first and last one from Pinterest. I'm pretty sure the one in the middle is supposed to be Zendaya, although it doesn't really look like her. More portrait studies. I actually like this one quite a bit. I feel like the skin tone looks the most natural out of all the examples I did so far. This next painting here might be the most favorite one out of this whole sketchbook for me. It's of this particular scene. I'm sure you've seen it before, of Blade Runner 2049, and it's the vein of the aesthetic of my channel. Turns out I'm really a big fan of the whole vaporware cyberpunk aesthetic here. Here I tried to draw Max Mayfield from Stranger Things. Again, the colors just weren't coming out quite right. For some reason, light colors for me always turn out dull and ashy. Here's another painting I did from a picture that I saw on Pinterest. Yet another picture that I've gotten from Pinterest. I really like the hair in this particular drawing. At this stage of my sketchbook, I was still trying to figure out how I wanted to do portraits, so I studied models with different facial features. I'm pretty sure this is from a magazine cover, but don't quote me on that. I'm not exactly sure what or where this was from. As you can probably guess from this sketchbook in general, I tend to leave a lot of pieces unfinished, and that's something that I see a lot of younger artists struggle with. First and foremost, a sketchbook should be a place where you can experiment different concepts and art styles as well as mediums. It's important to realize that not every sketch in your sketchbook will be completely polished, and that's perfectly okay. Sometimes getting your ideas down on paper is more than enough in a lot of cases. Here's a painting of Casca that I did. I remember being in VC with one of my friends talking about Berserk, and I decided to paint her. I still think this painting is pretty cute. Maybe I'll redo it in the future. Here I tried to recreate a scene from Love, Death, and Robots, but I didn't exactly capture the shiny jewelry as well as I could have in this particular piece, but I do think the face came out pretty good. And with that out of the way, it's time to move on to the next sketchbook. Next up is this watercolor sketchbook that I have gotten from Five Below, and as you can see, this sketchbook is really holding on for dear life. For some reason, as I started to use more and more pages from this sketchbook, the spine or spiral of the sketchbook became bent, and eventually some of the pages started to fall out. Allegedly, this watercolor paper is supposed to be 100% cotton, although I do look at it with some skepticism considering that I only paid $3.50 for this sketchbook. Typically, paper in this price range tend to be made of cellulose or a blend of cotton and cellulose, but seeing how there's nothing on the actual cover, I can't really confirm that one way or the other. I remember having a love-hate relationship with this particular sketchbook. Since I never used this type of paper before, again I spent the first few pages swatching my art supplies and seeing how they interact with the paper. I found the texture of this paper to be a bit weird. It wasn't exactly bumpy like cold-pressed watercolor paper, but it wasn't completely smooth either. I mean, for the price, I do think this paper is pretty good. You aren't gonna find cheaper watercolor paper in most stores. It felt like each different page had a texture that I had to get used to compared to the previous page. What I mean by that, some pages were rougher than others, some pages were more absorbent of water, others didn't want to take water in certain areas, making it harder to go over dry layers and add more details. It felt like I was fighting my paper most of the time. Now, I'm not sure if this is a me issue or an issue of the paper itself, but I've used plenty of different brands before and never ran into this problem, even with cheaper brands. If and when I go back to Five Below, I might purchase another watercolor sketchbook to make sure that it wasn't because I got a bad book, to see if it really does work like everyone says it does, or maybe I just had a bad experience. Who knows, stay tuned for that in the future. On to the drawings itself. This sketchbook lasted me from May 2023 to around September 2023. I will admit that I don't exactly have a strict timeline on when I start and complete sketchbooks, and I tend to jump around between different papers depending on what I'm working on, so some of the art might look sort of old, and some of the art might look a bit more recent. Here I remember I started to draw Link because a friend of mine was playing Tears of the Kingdom for the first time, and I was really excited to see Link in action again. Here was the very first concept art I had of my potential PNG tuber model. As you can guess, it went through a lot of changes since then. As you can see, I tried to do more gouache studies, but I wasn't exactly a fan of how gouache looked with this particular paper. No matter how long I will wait for the gouache to dry underneath before applying a new layer, the end result always appeared a bit more muddy than I was used to. Around this time I had received my Holbein gouache, so I knew it wasn't an issue of the quality of the paints, but rather the paper. Certain colors would just appear more dull on this paper compared to the other papers that I've used, and I couldn't exactly figure out why this was happening. I do have a theory that the paper itself was too absorbent and often left the colors in a weird, dull state, even if I didn't mix them too much and preferred to layer the colors on top of one another. I think on certain pieces like this one, the effect actually worked out pretty well, but on others, it was a bit frustrating. When it comes to simple layers and swatching, I think this paper again is pretty good. I remember using it a lot to select the colors I wanted in my new Daniel Smith palette at the time. I remember here I was trying to decide what green I wanted to add to my palette because at that time I only had the primary colors. I would go on to do this for other colors that I wanted to add to my Daniel Smith palette. Here is another random sketch I did. I think it was supposed to be of one of my OCs, but I didn't exactly finish it, as you can tell. This was yet another portrait I found on Pinterest. Again, I remember getting frustrated about how I was trying to layer my colors. It wasn't exactly coming out how I had planned. The same issue happened with this piece, although here I think I was trying to use gouache, but again it wasn't exactly drying as evenly as I had hoped. Looking back at it, I was definitely more in the hate camp for this paper than the love camp, although there were a few drawings here that I would go on to like. Here are some more swatches from my dart chart. This is where I fell in love with Moon Glow and Lunar Black, both colors that I probably feature in my new palette. Here's some more random sketches. I remember in this phase I was watching a lot of Twitch, specifically VTubers, and I remember Camilla debuting her new model, so I decided to paint that here. I still think this drawing came out pretty cute. The pink here actually came out pretty vibrant, which was weird compared to the rest of the sketchbook. Here I was doing more swatches from my dot chart, deciding what other colors I wanted to add to my palette. While the colors themselves don't look impressive on this paper, I do think the granulation does stand out quite a lot. Here I drew Faye Valentine from Cowboy Bebop, again another drawing from this sketchbook that I actually liked. I tried to use the whole muted colors to my advantage here, although I think I could have went a bit darker. Another random girl from Pinterest that I thought was cool. Another set of swatches. This was around the time of Honkai Star Rail being really popular, and I decided to draw a Kafka, although the color scheme wasn't exactly working out. Oh, I remember these next few pages being the start of me rewatching Sailor Moon yet again. Here is Black Lady, who I think is one of the coolest characters in the whole series. Here is Sailor Saturn, which might actually be my favorite drawing in this whole sketchbook. I think here I didn't have to fight with the paper as much to achieve the intended result. Here is Sailor Neptune. I also like how this particular piece turned out. I remember this sketchbook not liking ink pens for some reason, so for a lot of these pieces I didn't bother doing an actual line art, which in hindsight was kind of a mistake in my opinion. Next up is Sailor Uranus, but again I had to struggle to get the right shades, and eventually I just gave up on this piece. Maybe I'll redraw it in the future though. I would go on to finish this sketchbook with a bunch of random sketches and swatches, planning for other illustrations. I might give this sketchbook another chance. Maybe it was just this one that had paper issues, but all in all, I did have fun with this even with the frustrations. This leads me to my third and final sketchbook, my most recent one that I was working on, which goes from September 2023 to June 2024. Here I started the trend of wanting my sketchbooks to be a bit more personalized, so I took the time and primed it with watercolor ground. As you can see here, it is a material that lets you use watercolor paints on different surfaces, such as the leather that is on this sketchbook. This is yet another Reflections watercolor journal. I really fell in love with this paper and I continue to use it to this day. As you can see, I also decided to do a proper first page, and if you've been following me on TikTok, you've likely seen this drawing before. I did this drawing with watercolor pencils that I had gotten from Temu, and I think this final piece turned out quite nicely. These watercolor pencils had a bit of a floral theme to them, so I decided to continue that with the flowy dress. Just as a heads up, this and most of the art supplies that I've featured here today are in my Amazon shop. I am indeed an Amazon influencer, so if you buy supplies from my list, I will get a commission off of that. That would go a long way in me creating more consistent, high quality content for this channel, as I do work and I can't always record stuff as much as I would like. There's a link to my Amazon storefront in my card, but I will also link it down below the description of this video and in my previous videos. That said, times are tough right now, and even if you can't afford to support me monetarily, a like and subscribe would also go a long way in helping me create more consistent content. But enough shilling, back to the actual drawings at hand. As you can see with this paper, my paints, both gouache and watercolor, appear a lot more vibrant compared to the Five Below sketchbook. The first few pages of the sketchbook were mainly fan art, and the Black Mage drawing was part of an art challenge that I did that I kinda want to turn into a weekly series, but more on that later. Here I got sent lovely inks to try out from Ferris Wheel Press, and I was falling in love with these different colors that I received. The main color here is Malibu Bush, and I wanted to draw the city from which these inks were named after. I tried to go over this ink wash with a dip pen, but this paper has a bit of a texture to it, so I decided to scrap that and try the idea on a smoother sheet of paper. That said, I still really like how it turned out. Here is another challenge that I did where I redrew an old piece of artwork that I had made. I like the colors, but I definitely think the face could have been a bit more expressive. Here I drew Alucard, my beloved. I think I was in VC with a bunch of other people watching Castlevania. He's one of my most favorite characters ever, but I feel like I can never capture how beautiful he truly is, which truly is a crime of its own. Here was another drawing that I made with the Ferris Wheel pressed inks. The colors that I was sent reminded me a lot of dessert, so that's where I got that idea from. Here is Acheron from Honkai Star Rail, of course. I think we got the teaser trailer for 2.0 in that game, so I decided to draw her. I was also into a lot of Final Fantasy XIV at the time, so I decided to draw my two characters that I made there. As you can probably guess, I really do like purple hair. Here I was testing the paints that I gotten from TikTok shop. I made a review on these before. I actually posted that on YouTube, but I think I might make another detailed review after I've used them for a bit longer. But if you want to see that, then don't hesitate to like and subscribe. I will try to upload a video every week, although that may or may not be possible. I do constantly upload shorts though, so stay tuned for those. Here I was comparing the three major watercolor brands that I do own. I was comparing the TikTok shop colors to my Shinhan and Daniel Smith colors. If you're curious about the colors that I use, those are listed in my Amazon storefront, which I mentioned before. Here is another sketch of my FF14 character. I really like the pose, so I'm not really sure why I didn't paint it. Here are the set of swatches of my Daniel Smith watercolors. I'd finally filled out my whole palette, and I won't be adding any more colors anytime soon, so these are the colors that I mainly use. Again, I might make another in-depth video about why I chose the colors that I did for this palette. I think out of all three of my sketchbooks, this one seems the most cohesive, although there's still a lot of unfinished work here. I think I finally got back into the full swing of posting art consistently, and my mental state was definitely in a much better place. Another one of my favorite drawings in here is of this Firefly and Sam, again from Honkai Star Rail. I feel like I was able to capture the likeness of the character, yet still remain true to my own art style. Again, even more fan art from Honkai Star Rail, this time it's of Dr. Ratio. Here I was going over the color palette for my PNG tuber model, although I do think here it does look kinda dull. I want my colors to be a bit more bright and poppy. Here's another random sketch. I think it's of my OC. But wait, I'm not done with the sketchbook quite yet. What I really like about this paper is that it's so thick that you can draw on both sides and it not warp the painting underneath. So I decided to circle back and work on the other side of the page. I remember liking this sketch in particular because this was done with the cheaper watercolor pencils as well as the TikTok paints. Here's another sketch of my PNG tuber model. Another random sketch here. Here was a concept art I had for Robin and Sunday, again from Honkai Star Rail. I might make a full painting of this. I really like the idea, but I never actually colored it.